Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first live Q&A session for the Climate Action Solutions for a Changing Planet MOOC. My name is Elena Cree. I work with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN. So I have been working with your 24 lecturers over the last year to put together this course, so I hope you've enjoyed it so far. We're now in the 6th week of the MOOC. We've covered the Paris Climate Agreement. We've gone over deep decarbonization and looked at a few case studies, so looking at Australia, Canada, and Russia. So now the course is going to look more at the technical solutions. So this week we'll be looking at low emission electricity and renewable technologies. So today we have with us Ryan Jones. He is the co-founder of Energy Evolved Research. And he's going to help us understand a bit more about the transmission, energy storage, and integration of low carbon energy sources into our modern grids. So just a quick reminder, this is a live session, so please feel free to add in any questions that pop into your head on the live chat in the YouTube channel, and we'll do the best we can to address those in the time we have. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ryan and just ask him to do a quick introduction, maybe give us a quick background on Evolved Energy and how you got to where you are today. Ryan, all yours.
Great, thanks, Elena. Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm a co-founder of a small consulting company called Evolved Energy Research. And we've been in business now for about 1.5 years and do projects related to the transformation of the energy system primarily. So looking at kind of deep decarbonization is one huge area of research focus for us, as is all the issues related to high renewable penetrations on the electricity grid. Kind of integral to a lot of the work that we do. Before starting Evolved Energy, I worked at another consulting company in San Francisco, California called E3, Energy and Environmental Economics. And I was a consultant there for about 5 years. And prior to that, I was actually in school doing a master's program at Stanford in a program, a civil and environmental engineering program called Atmosphere and Energy. And I got my start in energy early, evolving out of an interest in environmental issues in undergrad and climate change in particular. Realizing that this is a challenge of our generation that is something where there's a lot of problems to be solved and a lot of work to be done, and energy being really central to this task of solving climate change. And kind of enjoyed science and math always in school, and so kind of going into the energy field and doing the work that I do now was kind of a natural fit.
Great.
So yeah, really happy to be here with everybody.
Wonderful, thank you. And just so you know, Ryan, we have quite an array of viewers at the moment, people from Netherlands, India, Brooklyn, New York, my backyard. So quite a diverse crowd. So going
well, I'm in Washington, D.C. at the moment.
All right. Going off of what you just said, I wonder, so Evolved sounds like a relatively young consulting firm, 1.5 years. Could you give us maybe a bit more context on like who are your customers or who are you selling your products to? Who are your stakeholders? I mean, who's really interested in this decarbonization, modeling these days?
Yeah. So right now, and due in large part to our kind of consulting network and our location, most of our work is in the U.S. And as everybody on the chat here is probably very aware, there is not a lot of political ambition at the national level, but that has kind of kickstarted quite a number of kind of government-led actions at a subnational level. So a lot is happening on the state level in the US, and that has been kind of one of the main categories of clients of ours over the last year. So we've done projects with the governor's office in Washington State, with NYSERDA in New York. We're doing projects in California and Oregon, um, and some other regional kind of efforts in Midwestern states in the U.S. So kind of a group of eight states there, and so that's kind of one category of client. Um, and the main question that those clients ask are, what are the physical changes in the energy system that are required between now and 2050 to reach our goals? And given our long-term goals of reaching the Paris Accords by 2050, what are the nearer term implications? So what does that mean for 2030? What are the transformations that we have to start, and what are the benchmarks that we need to hit in terms of infrastructure deployment primarily? So how many electric vehicles do we need to sell? At what rate do we need to electrify heating in homes, and heating in industry? Those type of questions that we try to help stakeholders understand and put into context. Then there's another class of client who are really private companies or utilities or other players in the energy industry who are maybe doing R&D, or they have a widget that they want to that they think is going to help mitigate climate change, and they want to understand how those technologies fit into a long-term energy context. Because and I'm sure one of the themes that Jim and others have brought up in this course is that the energy system changes we're talking about are not incremental, they're transformational. And that is that takes quite a lot of kind of analytical work to understand the way widget X fits into the energy system in 20 years, when the system ideally is going to look very different than it does today.
Makes sense. Okay. So we have a question here for Clara, and I'm going to try and put it in the context. So given, some of the scenarios that you've developed for different stakeholders, Clara from India is referencing a report by Greenpeace called Energy Revolution, where they propose a pathway to 100% sustainable energy supply, ending CO2 emissions, and also phasing out nuclear energy completely. What maybe some of the students have noticed in the course is that nuclear kind of keeps coming up as a component of the solution. So they're asking, what's your opinion on this? Have you seen scenarios that don't have completely zero nuclear and zero emissions? And if not, what was that report maybe not including?
It's a great question, and I think a fiercely debated topic amongst climate advocacy and groups that are pulling for climate action, both in the U.S. and elsewhere. So, at a high level, just to rehash kind of that controversy, there are really two schools of thought here. One says climate change is an emergency like we haven't seen before, and any solution, within reason, we need to basically be deploying as fast as we can. And if there are resources such as nuclear that are already providing us carbon-free energy, we need to do what we can to basically maintain those resources. I mean, do it in a safe way, but don't cut that the carbon-free electricity coming from those sources. I'm probably more in that school of thought, and then there's another school of thought that kind of says, we've got other options. Nuclear is bad for a whole host of reasons relating to both safety of the plant when it's operating and also disposal of the waste. We want to both decarbonize our electricity grid and move away from nuclear. Technically, The main challenge, right, is that, uh, and this is something we've touched on in our unit, is that with 100% renewable system, there are these imbalances of different, time scales and spatial scales, and the imbalances that are very difficult to deal with are the ones on a very long time scale, and so it leaves you with seasons of the year or weeks at a time when you actually have an energy deficit, and other times of the year when you have energy surpluses. And so when you have a third source of generation, besides wind and solar and other renewables on the grid, that is dispatchable in a way that it can fill, it can help fill those valleys and provide energy. It's not the fact that it's baseload, but it's the fact that it's dispatchable and provides reliable energy at a pretty affordable cost, at least for existing nuclear.
Mhm.
That's what makes nuclear valuable in this context, and the reason why we've kept nuclear in a lot of the work that we've done um, in the electricity context in the U.S.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. So I think that addresses Clara's question for the most point. And Clara, if you're listening still, I would encourage you maybe to post that on the discussion board as well, because maybe we can get some insight from our other students. And also looking at the report and seeing what it actually includes in it would also be helpful. So feel free to post that and we'll take a look at it. All right, moving on. So kind of going back to just your unit in general, Ryan, could you maybe go over some of the major challenges of integrating renewables? You maybe touched upon a little bit of the limitations just now with the nuclear conversation, but maybe a broader context of them.
Yeah, maybe the main challenges I'd probably divide into two categories right now. One is the long duration balancing question that I've already just talked on, and I'll probably bring that up again and again during the call as an outstanding challenge where we don't have good cost effective solutions. The other challenge, I think, relates to siting new infrastructure, and this is a challenge some places more than others. Certainly in the United States, it's a challenge. And to do 100% renewable grid or anything approaching that, we need levels of transmission, connectivity, and coordination between balancing areas in the U.S., which we just don't have today.
Mm-hmm.
And the siting of transmission, siting renewables is difficult. Siting of any power plants are difficult, but siting of transmission can be particularly difficult, and threatens to be, potentially a limiting factor, in at least being able to do renewable integration cost effectively. So that that's kind of one. That's as much an institutional challenge uh, as a technical challenge. And maybe just to highlight one other from the institutional side, um, the market system, the regional transmission operators, or RTOs as they're sometimes called, or ISOs, which operate markets around the world. Though the kind of structure and the way that those markets operate, I think is going to need to change in a very high renewable context. And just to give an example why, when you have, renewables are a very low variable cost resource. So they have near zero marginal cost. And the way these markets work today is, you have bidders that are bidding into the market, offering different levels of supply at a different price. And then the market clears at a certain point where you have kind of the demand for electricity, and you've got, a series of suppliers who are willing to offer electricity, and you've got a market clearing price. In a context where you have the majority of your electricity coming from zero variable cost resources, you actually have a zero marginal cost for a huge portion of the year potentially, and that just is a very different market than the one that we have today. And there are kind of a host of institutional challenges that come with that, in terms of how generators get paid, how do we maintain reliability on the system, keeping around, a capacity um, for local reliability and system reliability when the renewables are not generating, et cetera. So those are all challenges, and maybe those kind of fall into three big main categories there.
Great, very helpful. All right, next question we have from Anna Liz Svensson. So she asked, do you think that we need DDPs for all countries, rich and poor? And if so, how would we go about getting them done and helping them out with them?
That is a great question. I strongly advocate or feel that we need DDPs across the board, for every country, and the reason why relates to this, idea that I brought up before about this is an energy system transformation and not incremental change. And therefore, without the long-term perspective of where you want to go, it's very easy to make near-term decisions that lock you into a carbon trajectory which is not sustainable and not consistent with what you want to achieve in the Paris Accords. So, even though none of us have a crystal ball, obviously, and there is a huge amount of uncertainty in any modeling that goes out, over the next 35 years, particularly in the, having to do with costs and performance of different technologies. Without some type of roadmap, I think it's going to be very hard to do the type of planning that's needed. And to the point of, technology is constantly evolving, both performance and cost. That highlights the need, or the fact that creating DDPs is an ongoing process, right? So it's a process of kind of constant update and renewal, where you are creating new plans looking out 35 or 40 years into the future, and using that to help inform nearer term decisions on the system. So that is the why we need to have them for every country. In terms of how to go about doing it, there is certainly a lot of work to be done there. I mean, many of the kind of developed countries in North America, so the U.S., Canada, most of Europe, Australia, Japan, China to some extent, they all have a fairly high capacity to do this type of modeling, and just as important, they have data which is available to allow this type of modeling to actually happen in a robust way. So I would highlight data challenges for many countries in order to put together robust pathways. And those data challenges are particularly on the demand side of the equation, less so on the supply side. We can get lists of power plants in every country, existing power plants, and that is well and good. But if you don't know where the energy is going, and a lot of the transformation that needs to happen is on the demand side, that really presents a challenge. So this is not something that we're going to solve overnight. And it's going to be a combination of building and democratizing the tools for creating DDPs, and then also making sure that there's institutions in place that collect the data that is needed, and collect the data and make it publicly available for third-party researchers, to conduct the type of analysis that we need. And that those are going to be two huge challenges, which will be solved hopefully over the next decade, but can take a long time in some places.
Yeah, I can imagine when in a developing country context, when you're working on issues like malaria or poverty reduction, that, you know, knowing the gigawatts supplied to a certain region is maybe not a priority for the government to track it at this point in time. So that could be a challenge, for sure.
Yep. And it'll be just to add one more point on that. It'll be there'll be a process of incremental improvements of modeling in these countries. So, we recently completed a DDP for Mexico using the modeling platform that we use called and maintain called Energy Pathways. And that model does not have the granularity that our US model has because of some of the data availability challenges in Mexico.
Yeah.
But it is still a model which is sufficient for a lot of learning to happen, and will tell you a lot of very important things about the future of the Mexico energy system. And as that data becomes available, that can be iteratively updated, and it can also kind of highlight the need for data collection in countries, and can help drive that as well.
Great. So Raj Pukhan actually posed a very similar question related. So in developing countries, specifically India, do you think they can aspire to be carbon neutral by 2030? And how do you see that path to decarbonization evolving? And then just secondarily, do you think that they can continue on a rapid development ladder by using only renewables, or do they need to rely on those old fossil fuel resources to maintain that kind of rapid development?
So to the first question about a 2030 kind of carbon neutral goal, such a goal would be truly inspiring. I'm not sure it will be very difficult to do or accomplish in the next 15 years. And one of the main reasons for that is that the infrastructure that we have in the energy system is very long lived. So, there are coal plants being built right now in India which have an economic lifetime of 30 years, right? And there are internal combustion, petroleum cars right now being sold in India that, may have a lifetime of 15 or 20 years. So the challenge is, if you want to retire those energy assets early, that incurs a penalty or a cost associated with retiring an asset before the end of its lifetime, when it's been fully depreciated. So that's going to be one. Economically, that's one of the main challenges. And there are certain areas where the infrastructure is particularly long-lived, and it leads to long lag times in between when you make the decision that you're going to go carbon neutral and when you actually can achieve that. So if you imagine that starting tomorrow in India, you never sell another internal combustion engine vehicle, right? And it's only battery electric vehicles from here on out, right? Given the stock flow characteristics of that system, it's still going to be 15 to 20 years before the last internal combustion engine may be taken off the road, right? And so this is that's an important dynamic to appreciate, and something that is the main limiting factor in terms of ambition in the near term. But also a reason why we need to get as ambitious as we can, as quickly as we can, recognizing that reaching a 2050 goal really means scaling up to kind of full action by either 2030 or 2040, given this the infrastructure inertia that I just discussed.
Yeah.
Was there a second part of that question? Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I can't remember the second part. So if you want to prompt me on the second part, please do. Maybe there wasn't.
I feel like you got it.
Okay.
Sorry, so there's a lot of chatter on the side now going back and forth. And one of the interesting parts being brought up is, so the course so far has talked really about the technical and the infrastructure and the even economic parts of this transformation. But
Yeah.
what about the behavioral and cultural and even political ideals that are going to need to be changed to, realize these pathways? Any general thoughts on that, or any work that's being done to push that agenda forward alongside yours?
Yeah. I mean, it's so critical. It's it's very critical, and I can, there are, I think, a few things that need to happen, right? I mean, uh, first, to go back to the economic questions that were just brought up. I mean, today, with the current price of, the current comparison between the prices of these different technologies, the gap is shrinking. But right now, building, low or zero carbon is a bit more expensive than kind of conventional energy sources, right? And so, to return to this idea of the institutional or societal behavioral changes that need to happen, we need people to be okay with paying a slight premium on energy services today, and be okay with that in the context of when their government kind of regulates or puts into place policies that are meant to reduce carbon, and as a result, energy prices or equipment prices rise slightly. That is a kind of palatable choice for the public. So that is one of the main things. The second thing is, there are many decisions which are really take place on the side of the utility or government or large, or they're really business decisions, uh, and that's really on the supply side of the energy economy. And then there's a whole nother set of decisions which are equally important on the demand side, where people's um, uh, purchases are need to line up with kind of what we need in the long term. And so, um, short of just regulating we can never sell another gasoline powered vehicle. People have to choose to buy electric vehicles. People have to choose to buy heat pumps instead of natural gas furnaces. People have to choose to buy more energy efficient equipment, and when they build a new home, they have to choose, to spend a bit more upfront to get a very energy efficient building shell,
Yeah.
etc. So, um, I in this whole discussion, the thing that I haven't talked about and that I would not necessarily emphasize is behavioral change.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I don't emphasize that is because, um, you know, of course, every little bit that people can do on an individual level to help reduce their footprint is a great thing. However, incremental, however, the idea of behavioral change is also in and of itself an incremental strategy, right? And by that I mean, you never reach carbon neutrality through behavioral change. Similarly, you never reach carbon neutrality just by doing energy efficiency, right? So, the idea is, we don't, we want people to use energy services efficiently. We want people to continue to use energy services because that uh, is consistent with improving people's lives, right? And that is a one of our goals uh, here, but so you know um, answer is getting a bit rambling here, but so maybe I'll just cut it off. But I think I've hit the main points there that I would want to.
No, I think it was clear. I mean, basically, it's not going to just be a market solution or a government solution or a societal solution, but it's all of those pieces working in concert, and we need all of it. And I think you've mentioned that in your lecture as well. So I have a question from Raj, same kind of context in the India. So just knowing that, you know, given the NDCs that have been committed so far, I mean, most of them have trajectories where we're not actually going to achieve the 2-degree limit at this point in time. So just posing, do you envision any new technology coming in that would enable us to actually achieve it? Can we be hopeful? Do you know of any insider tips that we don't know about?
I know of no magic technologies that I'm keeping a secret from you guys. You know, I think to me, the biggest thing that gives me hope has been the cost declines and the key technologies that need to be deployed that we've seen over the last 5 years. So, you know, in many ways, the 2-degree, the transformation that needs to happen to get to 2 degrees, just to be frank, is so extreme. You really need a pull in addition to a push, right? And so that, by that I mean regulating your way to 2 degrees across you know, every country in the world in a way that you only do it with, you know, a stick, and you know, say basically you can't do this, you can't do this, you have to do that, and it's kind of unpalatable to people the whole way through. That is something that is hard for me to imagine, you know, us doing in the amount of time remaining to us. And so, but if you look at the cost declines that we've seen in solar and wind and electric vehicles, and kind of performance and you know, increases in building technology, et cetera, those are technologies which are increasingly being deployed just because they're the cheapest or just because they are better technologies, right? I mean, the Tesla Model S is the best selling you know, large luxury sedan in the US, right? Kind of beating out Mercedes and BMW and all the rest. And it's not just because it's an electric vehicle, but because it's an electric vehicle, it has a whole host of benefits as a great, you know, as a very well designed and well made car that creates a pull and not just a push. So it's, you know, it's kind of contrasting, if you will, the Prius versus the Tesla in terms of, you know, one is, you know, it takes you to the goal, but it may not be as sexy, and there's not as much of a technology, you know, technological pull there, versus the Tesla, where, you know, people are scrambling to buy them, just, you know, without, you know, really, you know, just separate from the fact that it's also a very good purchase in terms of our goal to mitigate climate change. So that, you know, those are kind of the things that give me hope. But you know, there's a ton of work to be done, for sure, in all of these areas.
Work and job opportunities, then, I presume.
Yes.
Because you mentioned Tesla, Ryan, I wonder, do you have any insights on the future of storage? Storage was a big part of your lecture and is obviously a big proponent of integrating renewables into the grid or other low emission technologies. So where does storage stand today, and where is it projected to go?
Yeah. So, there's been a lot of emphasis recently, as I'm sure everybody's aware, on battery electric storage. And you segued into this from discussion of Tesla. I think one of the reasons why Tesla is pursuing battery electric storage is it helps them achieve the economies of scale in manufacturing that allow them to also make cheap electric vehicles. So, anything that Tesla can do to make more batteries makes each kind of incremental battery unit cheaper and allows them to sell more cars. So, and I think a lot of the emphasis on or focus on battery electric, um, batteries and lithium chemistries in particular have kind of had this dual um, automotive and grid storage focus. The energy storage technologies that are most exciting to me, uh, in terms of the ones that I think are really enable these high renewable scenarios, are ones where the marginal cost of adding an additional unit of energy is very, very low.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, what I mean are, um, maybe just to give an example, to contrast um, pumped energy storage with a lithium ion battery. Um, so if you have a lithium ion battery and you want to expand the battery to be 2 MWh instead of 1 MWh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you are there's you're basically building two batteries, right? And the cost is going to be double the cost. Uh, if you have a pumped storage plant and you want to store 2 MWh instead of 1 MWh, what you're doing is you're expanding the size of your reservoir, and as a marginal cost, that is you're not having to build two pump storage facilities in its entirety, including the generator, housing, etc. So there are things such as thermal energy storage, compressed air energy storage, grid electrolysis to produce hydrogen, flow batteries, pumped hydro. I mean, those are all things that have very low um, marginal cost on a incremental energy basis for storage. And because the predominant challenge in the long term is this long duration energy storage or seasonal energy storage challenge, these are the type of technology I think that fit into that niche really well.
Great. Thank you for that. We had another question here about how much does deep decarbonization depend upon the integration of national electrical grids? And maybe you can give us some of your experience on the U.S. case study, I assume.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it is not necessary. It is one of the most helpful things that you can do, however. So you can do it without additional coordination. It just turns out to be a lot more expensive and take a lot more infrastructure build than if you do it in a smarter way. And that's kind of a theme of a lot of this, which is that these decarbonizing is robust to failure of any particular technology, but there are a lot of technologies that turn out to help you quite a bit, either save you a lot of money or make it a lot easier. And kind of regional coordination is one of those. I think if you think about a supply curve in terms of balancing renewables, so the things that are kind of most expensive and least expensive, transmission build and coordination. So, and maybe just to take a step back to kind of define what I mean by coordination. If you look at the way the electricity grid is dispatched in much of the world today, you have kind of different pieces of electricity grids which are connected and abut one another, but they're, say, two different utility companies that manage two different pieces of the grid, and each of those utilities are responsible for balancing supply and demand within their region, right? So they want to make sure that the demand of the load or the supply of the load that they're supplying in that region matches the demand in that region, and that any transfers between the two are explicitly counted for in trade in the sale of electricity. So that's how it looks today, and the basic problem with that is that these two electricity grids, which abut one another, they could be experiencing problems in opposite directions, where greater coordination between the two actually allows them to solve the problem for free. So just, you know, if one area is experiencing a surplus in energy and the other area is experiencing a deficit in energy, if they decide to trade or let electricity kind of flow freely between them, that is going to make for a more efficient power system. Anytime you can expand the market, you get kind of lower cost resources, which are the ones that are chosen to be dispatched. It reduces, both reduces costs, and it also reduces the cost of integrating renewables. So that's what we mean by coordination. And on this kind of supply curve of integration solutions, that turns out to be one of the cheapest. And if you can get transmission built, which is hard to do institutionally, if you can get it built, it turns out to be a very cost-effective solution for integrating renewables as well. Far more so than things such as energy storage, which are which can be costly when procured in the scale to replace the service that you get from the greater coordination.
Great. So then, kind of related, your thoughts on distributed energy resources, or community solar projects. I know you mentioned kind of the economies of scale and how you can get cheaper resources when you integrate into these larger systems. But what about those options, which I think are being used more in developing situations at the moment? But what's the future look like, and are those included in your scenarios?
Yeah, we have a lot of rooftop solar in the modeling work that we do. I think it is, there's a trade-off here because it is one of the most environmentally friendly sources of electricity that we have, in the sense that it's not taking up additional land that might be better used some other way, or returned to green space. So it is taking kind of an unproductive area of land, which is your rooftop, and it's producing energy right there on site where energy needs to be consumed, and that can reduce losses, and it can have a host of other benefits for the grid. So that's a great thing. I mean, the downside is that on a per energy basis, it's slightly more expensive than if you install a very large solar plant, say out in the desert somewhere on a big flat piece of land. I mean, that intuitively we understand why that is, and that makes sense. I think both are, it's not an either or, and both are very important, and both will be necessary. We don't have the roof space. Certainly in cities, we don't, the density of energy consumption is so high in cities that, take where you are, Alana, in New York City, you would never be able to supply all of New York's electricity consumption needs, putting solar on every rooftop in New York City, right? That energy balance just doesn't work. It doesn't work in most cities. So it works in suburbs or lower density kind of areas of development. So that right there tells you that places like New York, other large cities, are going to be energy importers, and that energy has to come from somewhere. And you're going to have large scale kind of utility scale renewable development that have to happen outside of where people live in order to supply that electricity. So I'm a big fan of rooftop solar, but it's necessary but not sufficient, basically.
Makes sense. So Ryan, I think you've given us a really good idea of, the challenges, but also the opportunities of these low emission technologies. I wonder if you could give us maybe an example of where integrated renewables has really taken off and really built out the majority of a grid. Any case studies or examples that you know of? And maybe also an example of where maybe it hasn't been so successful because of some of the challenges you've mentioned.
There are many examples that you'll find of kind of small island systems that have renewable diesel hybrid systems, and those are great. But the examples that I would point to as kind of most successful are the ones that have dealt with renewable integration challenges on the large scale, because that's what we need. And Germany is a place that comes top of mind in that context. I mean, Germany is a decade ahead of most of the rest of the world when it comes to renewable deployment. So much so that I think this past spring, the latest record that they hit was, I think it was about 85% of instantaneous electricity came from renewables on the system, which for a system the size of Germany's is an incredible kind of accomplishment. And so that is a success story that I would certainly point to. They're wrestling, I think, first with many of the balancing challenges that we kind of cataloged on that chart of different scales and different time, spatial scales and temporal scales for balancing. We're seeing those in places like Germany and California first. Maybe an example of a place where it hasn't gone quite as well, and not to, don't want to single anybody out, but there have been interesting anecdotes out of China talking about the level of wind curtailment that is taking place, particularly in the north of China, where wind development has outpaced the transmission capability that has been needed to connect that wind to load. And for stretches, and I'm not sure what the curtailment looks like today, but for stretches we've had 18% of that wind energy curtailed over the course of the year, which for a system with as a whole with very low renewable penetrations, that is a very large amount of curtailment which would be avoided with better planning. So I think the takeaway here is that I think with proper system level planning, the problems can be avoided, and in places where we've really seen issues, that has been one of the things that we point to as kind of the main ways in which things have gone wrong. So yeah, maybe success story and a temporary failure, even though I know China is doing a lot to mitigate that transmission curtailment issue in particular.
I'm sure, and the private investors that will come in and build that up are sure to have a positive outcome.
Yep.
Here's a question from Clara again. She asks, is it right to demonstrate against new infrastructure for liquid natural gas in Europe, for example, in Sweden, considering that this could be a dead-end lock-in and lead to more fossil fuels in the future?
Yes, I think so. I mean, liquefaction and export terminals of natural gas are not necessary in the long-term energy pathways that we are envisioning, basically. So, gas still has a role to play in many of these systems, but not necessarily natural gas. So it is synthetic gas when you split water to produce hydrogen, and then you methanate the hydrogen to produce methane. So that's synthetic natural gas. Or biogas, where you put biomass in a digester and it produces methane. Those are two sustainable sources of gas. At least when done with renewable electricity. And so gas will have it's an excellent energy storage and energy carrier that is still going to have a role to play. But the export terminals, which are exporting natural gas to markets around the world, produce a large amount of carbon lock-in and are not they are a part of the 20th century energy system and not necessarily the 21st that we want to build.
Gotcha. This is maybe an odd question, but can that infrastructure be reused for anything else? I mean, other than the sustainable gases that you mentioned, any other renewables? Or is that, I guess it's probably dependent on the context.
Yeah, I mean, using surplus electricity to make synthetic gas is going to happen at different places around the world, and certainly trade of that gas is also something that helps helps lower the cost of a sustainable energy future everywhere. I don't, given the fact that liquefaction and transport of gas is so expensive relatively, and it has a very high energy cost. So it's basically 20% or so of the energy in that gas you lose in the liquefaction process. It takes a lot of energy to liquefy gas and transport it around the world. It takes large price spreads in say that the price of natural gas in one area compared to another. So if you look at the price of natural gas in North America versus the price of natural gas in Asia, for instance, it's $3 or $4 versus $9 or $10, and that's the type of spread which is needed for that liquefaction. I'm not sure that in these sustainable futures there is a resource that has that spread where that infrastructure still is kind of economic to continue to operate. I would be skeptical of that, but it's possible.
A similar question, the transmission you've mentioned quite a few times, and that can be a limiting factor or an enabling factor for these solutions. Can the transmission infrastructure that we have today for fossil fuel plants and other historical energy sources be, repurposed in a renewable energy future? Oh
yeah, of course. I mean, the transmission that we have today, a huge portion of it connects load to load, and it connects generators to load when those generators are located relatively close to load centers already. So there are new lines that need to be built as we are connecting to places that are rich in renewable resources and bringing that electricity to load. But the kind of trading in between areas of load is of course really valuable and important, and most of the transmission line, there are very few transmission lines built for the 20th century electricity grid that just turn out to be obsolete in the 21st century. So there's there are very few kind of wasted transmission lines, I think, out there today.
That's good to hear. So we have about 5 minutes left. Ryan, maybe I could ask you to think of if you had any real solid takeaways that you wish the students to take from your chapter. Could you maybe just speak to those? And then at the same time, I'll give an opportunity Anybody on the YouTube channel, if you have any last pressing questions, please type them in now, and we'll try and get them addressed before we end here.
I mean, so much of the challenge of decarbonization is institutional and not technological. And what we've tried to do in a lot of our work is demonstrate that it is possible to reach deep decarbonization using today's technology. So technological progress helps, but it is not necessary. And so given that this is a institutional problem, I mean, that is where students like you guys really, come in, which is that you will be the next, set of business and political leaders that that need to come in and change these institutions to enable the transformation of the energy system that we need to see, right? So that is a people problem and not a technology problem. So that's something that I would stress. I mean, there's a lot that needs to happen in energy. There are a lot of jobs. It's a very good field to kind of pursue a career in today. And we need smart students like yourselves who are go-getters and can make a difference in the field.
So John D asked Ryan, thinking of his students, what kind of skills would Evolved be looking for new hires?
I think it's a combination of good analytical skills and the ability to work to take a problem which is nebulous and work towards determining a solution independently. I mean, that's a really big part of the skill set, which makes for a good consultant. As well as kind of the people and client skills in order to do the communication, because solving the problem is half the challenge, and the writing and communication skills to get the to kind of show what you've done from an analytical point of view is equally critical. So those are, I think those are the things that at least we look for in new hires.
Great. And then last question here I'll throw out from Kyle. So what is your opinion on the use of methane from the decomposition of trash in landfills? Wouldn't it be better to use that gas rather than venting and flaring?
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, if you have, it is better to flare it than it is to release the methane unflared due to the global warming potential of methane. But capturing that and using that to produce energy is going to, today, that's offsetting electricity that would otherwise be produced with natural gas or coal or another resource which is not carbon neutral. So that, all for it.
Great. All right, I think that is all for now. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be sending out an email for our next Q&A session. And we'll thank you for giving us your time, Ryan, and students for joining.
Of course. Thank you to everybody on the call here.
Wonderful.
Take care.